Hey everyone, Reaper here again with another video. This time I thought I would show off some books that I never show off on this channel. And they've become very, very popular over the last few years, and I think a lot of people have always treasured these in some form or another. But I wanted to show you my first 10 Nintendo Power magazines. Now look, I have a large set of Nintendo Power. I was a member of Nintendo. I was getting Nintendo Power right before it came out. Well, not right before it came out. Right as it came out with issue 1. I signed up for it. Or at least my mother signed me up to get the magazine when I got the Nintendo. And there was an advertisement in the package when you opened up the Nintendo. You had all these little things and all that. There was an advertisement that they were coming out with this new magazine called Nintendo Power. And it was coming out in a few months. And she says, "Oh, would you like this?" He says, "Oh, but you're not going to get it for another few months. The first one doesn't come out for another few months." I said, "Yeah, sure." So she signed me up for it, and I forgot about it. And then, I believe it was September or August 1998, August 88, the first issue showed up. So I have most of them, and there are some that I sold off over the years, but I do have most, if not all, of the early ones. But I figured I would show the first 10 because a lot of them are in different areas, but the first 10 I kept in a box. So with that being said, and I have multiples of a lot of these too, and I sold multiples of these over the years, I was able to get a lot of my books, a lot of these back, because obviously I didn't have all my originals from the late 80s, early 90s. I do have most of the ones from the early 90s, but a lot of the ones from the late 80s, like 88, 89, were destroyed over the years. But I was able to get those back, and then some, in sets on eBay back in 2000. So back in 2000 on eBay, I was looking to get a lot of those Nintendo Power magazines that I had 10, 12 years earlier. And I was able to buy single issues, but then I was also able to buy like year-wide issues. So that led me to have multiples. But anyway, let's get to the books. Let's get to the magazines. So we start off with number 10, Nintendo Power number 10. Now all of these have the posters and the things that you have to fill out in the back of the book. But here we have this one. I remember this was obviously what is this? This is January, February 1990. Okay, so this was months, it's not almost a year, but it was about a good half a year, a little longer, after the Batman movie came out. So a lot of us that had the Nintendo, we're waiting for the game to come out. It was advertised, and I think it came out around the same time Super Mario Brothers 3 came out, which was, I think, maybe March, April 1990. So a few months after this book came out, I think. It's a long time ago, so my memory's a little hazy. But anyway, when this came in the mail and I saw Batman in this magazine, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to get this. And yeah, see, Batman and Super Mario 3. Within a couple of months, the Super Mario 3 magazine came out, which I have. But I'm only doing 1 through 10. But that was a big deal. That Batman game, I know it's infamous for being difficult, but it's also a really good game. I think I beat it for the first time maybe about 7 years ago. And I've been playing that game off and on ever since it came out, ever since I bought it back in 1990. So, all right. Nintendo Power number 9. I got to put a bag on this one. Nintendo Power number 9, Tetris. Now, this was another game that came out that got a lot of fanfare, Tetris. I was never a big fan of Tetris. I mean, I like it, but when this came out, I wasn't one of those that just couldn't wait to play it. It's just like, it's not really my type of game. But what I was interested in, as you can see here, I was interested in RoboCop. I wound up getting RoboCop, and I liked it. I mean, it's not the greatest game, but it was kind of difficult. I mean, it was really difficult. But kind of silly at times. There were times when he could use his gun and times where he couldn't use his gun, which was stupid, But, yeah, like I said, I was never a big Tetris person. I was more interested in RoboCop. Okay. Nintendo Power number 8. Now this was another game that I couldn't wait to get. DuckTales. It was DuckTales and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Those were two games around the time of this magazine coming out that I couldn't wait to get. Turned out that DuckTales was the better of the two games, and even to this day, DuckTales is still revered as one of the best Nintendo games. It really is, and they remade it. Remember, they did a remake of it that came out maybe 10 years ago on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Just fantastic. And I thought that was great. That game was great too. And they got the original voice actor for Scrooge that played him on DuckTales. He voiced the game, and I think not long after that he passed away. I think the original voice actor for Scrooge McDuck wasn't that the guy who played Ed on Mr. Ed or something like that? I thought I read something like that. I don't know. Not important. What's more important is the game. And the game was excellent. Here we have Nintendo Power number 7. Mega Man 2 takes center stage. And they still had the bizarre, figure clay type designs on the Nintendo Power as the earlier ones did. So this is number 7. At the time when this came out, I remember looking at it and I was like, well, this is Mega Man. What the hell is Mega Man? Apparently the first Mega Man wasn't very popular. It had come out maybe, I don't know. This is the July-August 1989 issue. So I would assume it came out maybe, I don't know, a year earlier, if that. Sometimes they shelled out games pretty quickly and sometimes they didn't. But I think Mega Man 2 came out not long after Mega Man 1. And Mega Man 1, from my understanding, was not a success. It was very difficult. I know it's infamous for the bad box art. You those that are familiar with Mega Man, you look at the box art for the first Mega Man game on Nintendo, you're like, yeah, this doesn't look like the game. But the graphics were good. It was a pretty unique concept, but it was hard. It took me several years to beat that game, but I did, and I beat it several times. But it's a pain in the ass to get through that game. So I can understand why it wasn't so successful. But they decided to go with making this one. And I understand that the Mega Man 2 team was very small, but they had a wonderful time making the game, and they produced probably the most famous Mega Man game in the series. I mean, I personally like Mega Man 3 the best, but Mega Man 2 was wonderful. This time it had a difficulty setting, normal and difficult. The normal was really easy. And had more Robot Masters, which were really cool. New power-ups. It was a great game. Great game. But anyway, I remember getting this magazine, and I remember looking at Mega Man. I was like, oh man, I don't know, this just seems like it's an interesting game. And then, wasn't long after, it was maybe a few months after, I think it was around Easter time, 1990. My mother bought me Mega Man 2 because I remember a friend of mine, or someone I knew rather, in school, brought the cart into class and left it in his desk, which was stupid. No one stole it, but I remember seeing it. I was like, oh, that's that Mega Man game. And I think he started talking to me about it. He's like, oh no, it's really good. It's a really good game. So I gave it a try, and boy, was he right. And it was cool back then. You would use Nintendo Power to figure out the stages, and I talked to some friends on how to beat the 4th stage of Dr. Wily's castle. It was really cool. All right, let's move on. That was number 7, right? So here we have Nintendo Power number 6. This time they're featuring comic book characters, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, for their first Nintendo game, which was awful. I don't want to go full angry Nintendo nerd on it, but, it really wasn't a very good game. I remember when it came out, people wanted to play it because the cartoon, I was buying the figures at that time. I didn't know anything about the comic, but I was very much into the cartoon and the action figures. And Turtles around this time was May, June 1989. They were incredibly popular, and they would remain incredibly popular for a couple more years after this, until it's sort of like, the cartoon sort of flickered away and all that stuff. But I remember they were incredibly popular, so everyone wanted to play the game, which came out by Konami, one of the best video game publishers out there that made Castlevania. But that game was not good. That game was it just was unfair. It was overly difficult, and it was kind of silly at some parts. I know you could watch some videos how they talk about the water level, the dam level. We have to disarm all the bombs and how you can't avoid getting hit in certain spots. Yeah, I mean, that really contributed to the game not being so good. So, and then they had Ninja Gaiden previewed, and we're gonna get to this was what, number 6? Well, number 5 has a whole thing on Ninja Gaiden. Now, I remember Ninja Gaiden. I own it now. I bought it years ago, but I never owned it when it first came out, or even years after it came out. I bought it maybe about, I don't know, 15 years ago, or whatever, for cheap. But I remember Ninja Gaiden. A couple of my friends had it, and it was a fun game. It really was. It was fun up until a point, when it got overly difficult. I mean, but it really. I remember reading up a little bit on Ninja Gaiden. It had a lot of firsts in it, It had a very mature setting. It had cutscenes that typically were not seen in video games at that time to tell the story, because you know the little bit of the story from the manual or the little bit of dialogue that's on the screen, but it wasn't cinematic the way it was with Ninja Gaiden. And Ninja Gaiden was a pretty good game. The controls were very good, the graphics were very good, but there was a point where the game got really, really hard and unfair. I think there's a famous part at the end of the game where you're jumping and then this bird comes and hits you and knocks you back, and then the guy that's on the ledge over there reappears, and it messes everything up because it's one of those games where you get hit, you get thrown back, like Castlevania, which sucks. It's so stupid. But it prevented a lot of people from getting very far in that game. Now, I beat the game, I think, once or twice, but I had save states. So, for instance, once I passed that part I was just talking about, I would save it. So if I died, I could start back at that part where I don't have to do all that again. So I guess that's not really playing it the way it's supposed to be played. But the way it's supposed to be played sucks at those situations. That's not fun. That's not fair. That's, that's just my opinion, I guess. All right, that was number, what was all that? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Here we have Nintendo Power number 4 with Zelda 2. I remember this, I got the Nintendo in like around Memorial Day of 1988. And that's what I told you earlier, that my mother signed me up for Nintendo Power. It didn't start coming out, I think, until August or whatever. It was bi-monthly back then, and then eventually became monthly. Here we have, this is the January-February 1989 issue, and it featured Zelda 2. I remember back in the fall, the Christmas season of 1988, when it came to video games, the big game was Super Mario 2. But to me, the big game was Zelda 2. That's the one. I really wanted Mario 2, but I really wanted Zelda 2. And I wound up getting Mario 2, Zelda 2, and Double Dragon. Those were great games. But let me go back a little. Zelda 2 was a good game in hindsight. Mario 2 was a good game when you played it. Double Dragon was a great game when you played it. Mario 2 was much different than the first Mario, which I thought was good. I wanted something different. I just showed the graphics were better. I thought the play control was better. It was, nice, and you get to be all these different characters. Double Dragon, although it wasn't exactly like the arcade, and I wasn't familiar with the arcade, but it was pretty tight, strong game. Zelda 2, again, like with Mario 2, wasn't like the first Zelda, which is fine. I didn't go into Zelda 2 thinking that I was going to be playing Zelda 1 again. I liked the look of the new Zelda 2, and that didn't bother me. But, to me, around that time when I was playing it, I so desperately wanted to like it, but I just never could get into it. But despite that, I continued to play it. One last thing before I move on to issue 3. I remember trying to find those games was a nightmare. I'm not going to talk about Mario 2. I'll save that for the first issue. But Double Dragon was hard to find, but Zelda 2 was very hard to find. So anyway, when we went to go looking for it, my dad took me to this place called Kitty Mart that was in Linden, New Jersey. It's like a poor man's or at least I thought it was a poor man's Toys R Us. Okay, it wasn't like a KB Toys or anything. It was like more like a Kitty City. It wasn't Kitty City, but it was Kitty Land or something like that, Kitty Mart or whatever. And the guy had Super Mario 2, Double Dragon, and Zelda 2. I was like, oh my God, we're going to get them all. So my father looked at me and he said, and then the guy was saying the prices, because he was selling them for $60 a piece. That's what games go for today. This was back in 1988. He said that he had to get these games from Canada and they were very hard to get. And back then, games were hard to get. If Super Mario Bros. 2 came out, maybe Toys R Us got maybe 10 copies of it, and it went like that. Same thing with other places like KB. Maybe got 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 copies. They didn't get many copies. And if you wanted to put your name on a waiting list, well, they get a piece of paper out, they put your name at the top, and whenever these games came in, whether 5 came in, 10 came in, they'll call the first 5 or first 10 on that list, and you get it. They didn't do the prepay back then, or at least at the stores that I went to. So it was much different when it came to securing a copy that everybody wanted of a game back those days. So anyway, he didn't want to buy me the games to begin with. So he looked at me and said, pick one. And I said, pick one? He said, pick one. I said, oh, okay. So I picked Zelda. And because, I was a big Zelda fan. I've just throughout the summer, I was playing the first Zelda, and I loved it. It was a hard game for me, but I loved it. So I was like, naturally, I wanted to play Zelda too. I like Zelda better than Super Mario Brothers, although Super Mario Brothers was a great game. And it took us another month or two to find the Mario 2 again and the Double Dragon. But eventually we found them. But I picked Zelda. And I remember it was a pain in the ass to get some of these games back then. It was, just didn't know when you were going to get them. All right, Nintendo Power number 3. I thought that this issue, the first 2 issues of Nintendo Power I really enjoyed. But this one was kind of a letdown because it didn't really feature anything that I wanted or really was into. But here's Nintendo Power number 3, a very nice copy. I remember I got this, Nintendo Power 2 and 1 in one package. Remember I said in the beginning of the video I was buying, sometimes I bought single issues, but a lot of times I bought them in bundles. Well, this was a bundle, and they were all kept in pretty good shape. But here's Nintendo Power 3. It featured Track and Field 2. I didn't care about Track and Field or Captain Nintendo or Blaster Master. I remember Blaster Master. I never liked that game. That game was boring. It was hard. It just wasn't appealing to me. So this issue didn't really have too much in it. I mean, it had a couple of things in it that I liked, but it was a bit of a letdown. Probably my favorite cover of all the Nintendo Powers, Nintendo Power number 2. Featured Simon's Quest. Now, like Zelda 2, that year in this is a nice copy too. I mean, it's probably like a 7. I'm going to have it graded, but we'll see what happens. The number 1 I had graded, and it came back a grade I did not expect, but more on that when I get to the number 1. But Castlevania 2, I loved Castlevania. My cousin introduced me to Castlevania. She would come over the summer and bring Nintendo games, and she mentioned this game Castlevania. And she brought it over, and I fell in love with it, and that's where I get my name, the Reaper, from, right? There, and one of the bosses, the boss right before Dracula, was the Grim Reaper, and that's where I get my name for the channel, from Castlevania. So anyway, naturally, that year, late year, 1988, there were a lot of Part 2s coming out. Zelda 2, that I just talked about for about 10 minutes, Super Mario Brothers 2, Castlevania 2. And I really wanted Castlevania 2. I didn't wind up getting Castlevania 2 until 89, but I was able to rent it a couple of times. But I remember looking at this and just seeing how Castlevania, like Super Mario 2, like Zelda 2, was different than the first one that came out. It had really good graphics, but it was just different. It wasn't a linear-based game. Like the first Castlevania, you do stage 1, you do stage 2, you do stage 3. And of course the difficulty changes, but it's a linear game. Mario 2 and Mario 1, they're linear. Zelda was never linear, but Castlevania 2 wasn't linear. You had to go from one town to a mansion, then find something else, and go to another mansion. Very similar to a Metroid, which some less than 10 years later, Metroid and Castlevania would be combined to create Castlevania Symphony of the Night and a whole new genre called Metroidvania. But that's something for another video. But the point is, Castlevania 2 was different. But, you know, I remember when I was renting it, and I loved the graphics of it, but again, like Zelda 2, it wasn't what I expected. I remember I had such high hopes for Zelda 2, I had such high hopes for Castlevania 2, and they kind of let me down. It wasn't until, I remember I beat Castlevania 2 maybe about a year or two after I bought it, so I beat it around the time, not too long after I purchased it, and I enjoyed it. You know, again, it took me longer to beat Zelda 2, but I enjoyed it. I think I beat Zelda 2 for the first time in 2015. I think I beat Castlevania 2 for the first time in, I don't know, 89, 90. So it wasn't that much longer after I got it. But, yeah, I remember the cover was great. And I remember I heard that this cover caused controversy because the guy's, you know, holding Dracula's head and all that stuff. But, you know, by today's standards, it's rather tame. But yeah, Castlevania 2 was kind of a letdown for me. I mean, I know the Angry Nintendo Nerd did a video on Castlevania 2, and a lot of the aggression or displeasure he had in it, rather, which turned to aggression, you know, was well founded. You know, you just don't know what to do, you don't know where to go. But I have to admit that one scene, that one part where you have to kneel before the wall holding the red crystal to take you to a different area of the game so that you can complete it, I figured that one out on my own. I was holding the crystal, and I went up to the wall, and I'm like, oh, where do I go? It's got this friggin' wall. So I just knelt down and pretended to pray, like, oh, help me find to get out of here. And then the tornado came, and I was like, oh, seriously, true story. So then once I did that, there was another area of the game where there's just like this lake. So I said, well, I have the red crystal. Let me kneel down. And I think I had the red crystal. Yeah, I had the red crystal when I knelt down, did the same thing. And then another area opened up. So I figured that one out on my own, but that was just dumb luck. I was just frustrated. And now for the last one, we have Nintendo Power number 1. We got a 6.0 on this. I thought it was going to get a 7. So this is like one of my most disappointing grades that I've ever gotten back. But yeah, got a 7. But it's like all the other books. It's completely intact with the poster and all the other little things, the player's card and all that other crap that these things came with. Obviously, this is not the Nintendo Power that I owned when I got it back in 1988. This is one that came with Nintendo Power 2 and 3 here off of eBay back in the fall of 2000. I think I paid like 20 or 30 bucks for them, which I thought was expensive because I was like, oh man, these things are like supposed to be like $5. Yeah, but whatever, they were selling. But yeah, this was a great, when this came, this like the second issue, I really loved it. It had so many good things. I think it had Double Dragon in this, right? It says Zelda the Second Quest, not Zelda 2. You know, when you beat the original Zelda, you think of going on a second quest where everything is rearranged. I never gone through the second quest of Zelda, but this was a great magazine. It was so good, such a funky design, you know, but it was just such a great magazine and really opened the doors for a lot of people. Nintendo Power back in the day was a very good magazine. It previewed their games, and they had a lot of great games. They had a lot of shitty games too, but they had a lot of good games. And when you needed those tips, white pager too. But then again, though, I would imagine that's for most of these. You know, it had a lot of good tips. They really did give you the tips that you needed to get through these games, the maps and strategies and all that stuff, and did a lot of great previews of upcoming games, got you interested in what was coming out 5-6 months later, a year later, sometimes never. But yeah, Nintendo Power was a great magazine, and those early issues, in particular the first 10 that I showed you, and of course others over the years, but in particular those first 10 really laid the foundation for what would be Nintendo's grasp on the video game industry and revitalizing the video game industry. Hope you enjoyed the video. Take care, everyone.